Ludonarrative buttons. Tekken is not my favorite fighting game, but I wholeheartedly believe that it is one of the easiest fighting games to understand at a basic, intuitive level. Why? Because its buttons are obvious. Each of the 4 face buttons corresponds to one limb: left arm, left leg, right leg. Given that each character fights using a style that corresponds to the real world, people with any sense of what unarmed fighting in the world is like can use that knowledge to experiment on instinct. Boxers will obviously use a lot more left arm, right arm. Taekwondo people will use a lot more right leg, left leg. Capoeiristas probably use arm buttons to set up leg buttons, while a Shaolin Kung Fu practitioner may use leg buttons to set up the arm buttons. Even people who don't know how to fight have a vague sense of how to swing limbs around to hit something. These, my friends, are what I call ludonarrative controls. The buttons and the inputs are designed around mimicking the story, the setting, and the visuals that deliver on the game's emotional, conceptual experience. And you see this everywhere, though in often simplistic ways. Press a trigger button, and that's firing a gun. But if you hold a trigger button, that's drawing back a bowstring. Your canonically right-handed Soulsborne character presses R1 to swing their right arm, and holds the L1 button to statically hold up their shield, unless using the Sword of Artorias, which canonically forces people to become left-handed. Movement with a stick allows for 360 degrees of possibilities, which feels natural and smooth when moving a character through 3D space. Yet, the precision of the 4 directional pad buttons are better suited to the grids that make up movement in 2D spaces. Holding back to block? No, not intuitive at all. Neither is pressing nor holding a face button. Generic blocking in fighting games lack any ludonarrative intuitivity. I'll defend this statement in a future video. Yet, as controllers' button layouts have mostly stopped innovating, so too have designers stopped innovating on their input schema. Quick semantics. A button layout is what buttons exist on the controller and in what space. An input schema is how the button is used and in what manner. The X button being the left or bottom face button arranged in a square rotated 45 degrees is a button layout. Pressing, holding, mashing, and releasing the X button are input schema. See Hotsider's video, Why Do Controllers Have Select Buttons? Assigning each face button to a single limb in Tekken is an input schema, whereas horizontal, vertical, kick, and block is the face button input schema for Soul Calibur. Lord, it's so bad. Why is that one my favorite fighting game? But when, honestly, was the last time you pressed a button in a way that was fundamentally different from other games? Souls-like games now use shoulder buttons for attacks for no reason other than shoulder buttons are used for attacks. Touchpads came and went as either out of reach or less accurate versions of buttons. Everyone is too afraid of gyro controls because most players are accustomed to sticks and mouse cameras, even though they are technically more precise tools for aiming than analog sticks. Nintendo has been trying to use microphones as input schema since Hey You Pikachu, but they've never been more than a one-off gimmick. Input schemas are stagnating. Yet some innovation has been taking place over recent years. Some horror titles like Stifled in silence, deceit, and escape the ayuoki are using microphones in an interesting way, requiring you to stay quiet while actively attempting to make you scream, and before your eyes uses eye tracking to progress the story whenever the player blinks. Both are input schemas that test the player on not creating an input rather than an active input. Then there is the VR gaming space, which is innovating by necessity to create the sensation of one-to-one movement while preventing video game-induced vomiting and migraines. The VR space is the wild west of button layout and input schema right now, as they try to understand how to abstract hand-eye coordination into games. And speaking of the Wild West, horse input schema have gotten really stupid. In The Witcher 3, you can move your horse forward by holding forward on the left stick. Are you serious? Do you expect me to believe that Geralt is pulling Roach, the horse's reins, forward? Utter nonsense. Whereas aggro in Shadow of the Colossus remake can only be pulled left, right, and backward, aggro resists your inputs as well, causing the player to use those inputs more like they are interacting with an animal. That's why aggro is my best friend, and Roach is just a self-driving fantasy car in the shape of a horse. Look, here's the bottom line. To elevate a video game into a free-form philosophical dialogue through play, you need to be able to associate an idea in the player's mind with an action of the player's body while manipulating the controller. Yes, it is possible to just label the button with an idea-relevant word and call it a day. The bar is pretty low, but imagine the impact of the experience with those value-laden controls if, on their own, the controls felt like the idea on a socially intuitive level. The player would be significantly more ready to feel the dialogue with their hands, and thus more ready to feel the dialogue in their mind. Input schema are the key to make gaming into a philosophically rich action. Stay true.